Very good.
Oh,
We're back.
there we go.
We
back.
are back. We are back.
I'm moving off this, and Be Live goes nuts.
You did move off us. Something's different.
He's in the closet.
I'm in the cupboard under the stairs. I am being Harry Potter.
Very nice. Yeah, good sound. I like it. Very good. Look, guys, let's get this started off here because we're 10 minutes into it. Okay, so carnivore or omnivore, and I think just to start us off, let's just help people with those definitions. And I think everybody knows what a carnivore is at this stage, and it's
I'm not sure I do.
Well, I can give you. There seems to be two types of carnivore, which is a bit tricky. But I think one derives its nutritional needs from meat all the time. That's all it needs. All it needs is meat, and that would be a very simple, easy to go definition. Don't need to think much more about it. And an omnivore would eat meat and plants. That would be the dream that was the case. And then you'd have a herbivore at the end who eats just plants. So the omnivore could be eating 20% plants or 80% plants. So there's quite a range of omnivores there in the middle. The problem is that there is different types of carnivores and omnivores. So you'll learn that cats are obligate carnivores, and we're all sure about that. They're obligate carnivores. The definition of an obligate carnivore is they depend only on meat for survival. Their bodies cannot digest plants properly, which I just took from this biology book here. And yet Mars and Nestle feed them largely plant material. They eat more plant material than meat. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about that they can thrive on meat and meat only, or how come we're feeding them largely plant material? So I think these definitions leave a lot to be desired. We've got facultative carnivore for a dog, and facultative carnivore are those animals that eat animal food in addition to non-animal foods, which sounds very strangely like omnivore. So the grain of the terms is a big problem, and people tend to throw out the term as if that helps us know what it is to feed the animal in front of us. If an alien was handed a dog and said, "Here, feed that," they'd go, "What does it eat?" And we'd say, "It's an omnivore." And they go, "So it eats any meat, any plant, in any variety, in any amounts," but that's not the case. Omnivores go up in certain niches to eat certain amounts of plants. Red foxes eat lots of animal matter and a little bit of plant material. And bears eat lots of plant material and a little bit of animal matter. And so you can feed one like the other. So I think a really classic thing was somebody who just cut through all the garbage of the chat at the end, who was it? Tara Campbell said, "Look, what are we talking about? Survive or thrive?" And so I think I've just covered everything there in one go. Well, people throwing out the word omnivore, therefore I feed them 50% biscuits. It's like, oh, okay, hang on there. Say, well, it is plant food. We need more than that. I think the terms are very, very misleading, and people are losing friends over because they're just arguing, barking like dogs through a fence. So
one of the problems I have with carnivore is it implies meat, but in fact, dogs, given half a chance, will eat anything. But just sticking with the animal-based things, a mouse, a rat, a rabbit is not just meat. There's bone, there's cartilage, there's organ meat, there are blood vessels, there's brain material, high in fat, EPA, DHA, all these amazing things. So to say carnivore, that's not strictly true. To say omnivore, that every omnivore eats everything is not strictly true. And if you think of the average horse or the average cow chomping through loads of grass, they're actually going to be eating insects as they chomp through this grassy material. Well, they definitely don't eat herbs because they eat loads of grass, in fact. So it's just... I just think that this terminology is insufficient to allow us to paint a picture of the whole spectrum of what we're dealing with.
I would love to bring in there that actually the other thing that so many people that talk about herbivores and look how healthy they are, and they sort of compare why they should be able to survive as well, don't realize, no, they're actually bacteriivores. They actually are surviving on all of the nutrients that the bacteria produce for them in fermentation. They are not, the plant material that goes in is not really the mainstay of what feeds them. It is actually what feeds the bacteria, and the bacteria then releasing the nutrients. All of those vitamins we've already talked about coming from bacteria. All of those essential fatty acids and volatile fatty acids that build of the building blocks for them come from the bacteria. A load of proteins and essential amino acids come from the bacteria. That is not coming in that plant material.
In a way, no animal digests plant matter. And no animal digests cellulose, that's for sure. Only bacteria can do that. So that's interesting. And even herbivores are highly specialized. I mean, if you think you can just, he's a herbivore, feed him grass. Well, you've got deer are herbivores, and there's 20 different species of them or whatever, but they all eat different things. You've got the females that eat small, richer bits of the plants and shoots and berries and nuts, and they will browse. Whereas the males are much bigger, flat faces, wide lips, and they crop. They'll eat lots of grass, so they have much bigger bellies and chest cavities to eat poor quality forage, but they have to eat a lot more of it. You can't feed one like the other for long, because if you feed a higher quality forage to the male, he'll hold on to it too long. He risks getting bloat. So you can't just feed even cows like goats. You know what I mean? They eat different parts from the field. They will select different parts from the whole niche that they evolved in. So if you think herbivores are specialized, can you only imagine how specialized? An anteater. I mean, you can't give an anteater a steak. It just won't fit down his... Is it his nose? What is that? Is it his mouth? What's long on the
really tiny little mouth? Tiny little mouth.
He doesn't have a little tongue that comes down his nose and then sucks him up his nose. No, doesn't do that.
I wasn't thinking that was a bad mistake. We'll have to edit that out, please, Pete. Can't have that.
I know you've been really poorly for the last week or so,
still there.
I'll forgive you a few inaccuracies.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, and I think the other one is that people talk about the evolution, and when people talk about wolves and look what the wolves ate, and we say, well, this animal's been its own thing for 40,000 years. So, just looking at what wolves eat isn't the most useful thing to us, really. You kind of want to look at something a bit closer than that. So I like looking at dingoes. I mean, they're as close to domestic dogs as you could possibly hope. They interbreed, which is one of the surest signs that they're not too far away from each other. You won't get a wolf and a dog interbreeding too easily. So it just doesn't happen as much. But these dingoes are pure carnivores. I mean, pure carnivores. Now, there's a big dispute over how dog they are and that kind of thing, because that's going on in Australia, and I poorly understand it. But so, they do come from a long line of meat eaters. But I think what changed for the dog, the big consideration is that we didn't take the dog's diet was irrelevant to us for the first 3/4 of his existence with us. This animal, we started hanging out together because this animal was a great hunter, and he helped us hunt, and he alerted us when people came near our camp, and he protected us. And so these animals came closer to us because they were useful. They'll pick off our scrappings, and we were largely meat eaters, roaming scavengers ourselves. We weren't growing crops for the large part. It was only 6,000 years ago we decided to start doing that. So we had this kind of friendship built up, and we would have tolerated the friendlier wolves, the wolf type proto dogs, and we would have not been friendly with the aggressive ones. So you automatically end up choosing a sweeter and softer animal that starts to live close to us and then starts to work right beside us in hunting. And it's only 6,000 years ago where the dog goes, what are you doing out in the field there? And it's just planting these seeds and growing wheat. Check this out. Don't have to move, just have to eat carbs all day, and all the problems that come with that. So you become a slave to the land, and suddenly the dogs are hanging out going, okay, well, we'll still go hunting because that's what humans do, and we did. But they started getting a few little scraps here and there. So there's Gabrielle Joy. Did someone mention dingoes? Thank God I didn't talk anymore about them. Got to get you on, Gabrielle, to talk about dingoes, and we will. I think, Nick, you like this bit here, so I'm just going to throw the spanner to you. So we know that humans have been feeding small amounts of carbohydrates. They eat the leftovers of whatever society they're living with. And this is a big problem with the diet studies, because you can pull a diet study from India, the dog's largely vegetarian, and you can pull a diet study from a group of feral dogs, never see humans. They're very, very carnivorous. So the problem is that they looked recently at the genes of the dog, didn't they, Nick? And they might have found some little changes. Would you accept that, Nick?
Yeah, I would. Okay, so I didn't know you were going to be talking about this. Is the Axelson study, which was in Nature. It was a short communication, I think, but it's in Nature, which used to be considered one of the best in the world. Won't go there. And so he compared about, 30 wolves, the genes of 30 or so wolves, the figures might not be quite correct, with 30 or so domestic dogs. And he said, what are the similarities, what are the differences. He found that there were about 30 genetic differences, of which maybe only 2 or 3, it looked like about 7 or 8, but when you look at the detail, I think it was only 2 or 3 which actually coded for example, eating carbohydrates. Okay, and the big conclusion there, and the Hills and the Raw Cannons of this world were all over this, saying, there you have it, dogs require carnivores. But it's a point I think that you've brought up before, Connor, where you say, just because you can digest something doesn't mean that it's good for you. You know, your quote is something like, let's have cookies for breakfast, or Mars bars and cookies. You know, you can digest it. Does it do you any good? Or let's have vodka for breakfast because you can digest it. You know,
I can digest ethanol.
But the thing is, you will also, the other thing to put into that, and I think we should do a whole show on the Axelson paper.
You do, you said that, yeah.
The thing is, you will evolve to metabolize toxins and those things which aren't doing you a lot of good, as well as those things which will do you a lot of good, like great proteins and great fats and what have you. So I'm not sure that Axelson is actually saying that our dogs are carnivores. Also, dogs, how many genes has a dog got? A human's got 22,000 or so. How many genes in a dog, guys? I can't
exactly. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
and
actually, how many are similar across all mammals? In fact, actually, all living life. Yeah. You know, this is the ridiculous thing. It's then epigenetics, and it's about what your bacteria are doing and what all of the other environmental influences on your genes are about to how you end up forming. I think there were so many elements to that paper on just because your genes have it, you know, doesn't make you be able to deal with that. You know, if you were left with no way of surviving, you know, other than just eating what you could come across in the wild, okay, so no human influence, there is no way on God's earth that dogs could survive on a high corn diet. You know, they just wouldn't be able to grind it. They just wouldn't be able to get it. Can you imagine them jumping for the corn on the cobs? They'd all be dead from getting it stuck in their gut. Anyway, but from a point of view of, I think it's all very well finding the genome that has it in, or the genetic material, but it's a totally other thing to be able to grind that up. Well, they don't have, you know, we've talked about the anatomy at length in the past. I'm not going to go there again. You know, they just don't have it. They don't have that, or the physiology in the gut to be able to, or the fermenting areas in the gut to be able to digest that. But there was a really interesting point earlier on, which was with regards to, okay, so let's deal with, well, firstly, the descendancy. You know, actually, when we're talking about wolves, we're talking about cousins. We're not talking about their ancestors. Okay, I think, you know, it's really important thing to sort of bring up, because there has, you know, often we get that thrown at us that dogs are not descended from wolves because, you know, they've evolved alongside each other over millennia, and actually the predecessor to the wolf was the ancestor.
Grey wolf type ancestor. That would be the
grey wolf.
Type ancestor.
Yeah. But then we're moving on. So there's this whole thing about, okay, so some dogs and wolves will be found to eat berries, you know, blackberries on the, you know, bush naturally themselves. You know, philosophically or no reason why that might be the case to these guys. And, you know, look at, you know, what do you think they're getting there? Because they're not surviving on that plant material. So what are they gaining?
Maybe they just like them. Maybe they just like the sugar, you know. It's interesting. Penny Wood says here, certain genes, I think, I'm not sure quite what you're talking about there, Penny, very highly conserved across the animal kingdom. Very few genes are unique. I'll tell you, here's a show. We get Penny Wood whose name is not actually Pennywood, but that we'll call her Pennywood. We'll get her on, and we'll discuss Axelson, because she can bring the genetics of zoo animals into the equation, and we can let's just go through that paper. I've done it once, and there are flaws left, right, and center.
I'm going to be interested to hear them, because
I have posted that paper on Facebook just now for people that want to have a look at it. They can go into it.
I think I'm going to be interested to hear the flaws that you notice in it, because I think the problem with the paper is what everybody did with the findings. And like you said, Hills and Royal Canin say, this is why we've been feeding 60% carbohydrates to them since the 1940s. And it's like, oh, you knew, did you? In 74 years, this paper was coming out. Darwin would have killed to see this tiny evolutionary steps that the animals taken towards carbohydrate digestion. But it's not the only one. They also produce a hepatic glucanase. They do a couple little conversions that true carnivores can't. What is the vitamin A to something, and a couple of other bits and pieces. They're twice as good at assimilating glucose as cats. Dogs are now. And so I think, in my opinion, I'm not quite as kind of surprised that these tiny little steps have been taken, but also there's gene regression. If you stop feeding carbohydrates to dogs, those genes can regress and disappear as well, all thanks to epigenetics. So there's all this going on at the moment, a lot of nonsense about these genes. And I would say, is that what you're going to focus on, this little tiny bit? It was Doug Caneuven's quote to Gene Dawes, not mine, where he said, I can digest sucrose and ethanol. It doesn't mean 50% of my diet can be cookies and wine. So as much as you want it to be, it's not healthy. So, to say that this is why dogs need carbohydrates it's quite the opposite. The rest of the body is completely carnivorous. And like from the biology, which we have done to death, so we don't really need to do too much. But some people did mention the molars, and there's people out there saying they've got grinding molars. So it's like, I am mad. Like, the main thing, all you need to know is the back teeth come down beside those teeth. There's no side-to-side movement. You can't. They're not locked on top of each other for grinding. The back teeth come down. It's a carnasal tooth. So forget grinding. It's not possible. Your jaw only goes up and down. That's a carnivorous mouth. It's not to say you can't pick fruit and enjoy a little bit of fruit, as Nick was saying. I mean, who doesn't like a bit of sugar and antioxidants? And I think some wolves will do it now and again. Okay, but that's not the mainstay of their diet. On the grand scheme of things, that's a blip in the summertime when there's plenty of meat around. It's a blip, and so I wouldn't be kind of looking at a cat eating a bit of grass and going, he's not a true carnivore. It's like, that's medicinal. So there's many reasons why animals can take bits of plants. There's reasons why cows take the legs of baby birds, and red deer take all sorts of bones when they need, because they're growing these antlers. Hippos will do all sorts of weird stuff. And it's like, pandas will eat a tiny few insects if they're really short on protein. So like, that's because they're a carnivore at the end of the day. They're in carnivora, except they're complete plant eaters. It's just a big mess, and people get very kind of head up with it. I'll come back to the previous girl's point, Tara Campbell, saying survive or thrive. Cats are surviving on largely plant-based pet food at the moment, and they're obligate carnivores, and everyone agrees. So yes, we know they can survive to a certain amount of time, but it's not thrive. The studies that we have of thriving dogs are dogs on raw dog food, which we would all agree would be lots of meat and bone and organ, tiny bit of veg. They're the studies we have. They're the studies we have of dogs thriving. We don't have dogs thriving on vegan diets or plant-based foods. We have them these dogs compared to dogs eating cereal-based pet food, which is largely vegan food anyway, and they pretend that that's a good analysis for a year. So all we have is evidence of dogs eating an appropriate diet and doing really well, but we don't have anything in the middle. So the survive and thrive thing is very interesting. I think you can feed a dog 50% carbohydrates because most of the world is, and you can do it, but we also have terrible obesity problems, pancreatitis, getting 10 times the cancer we are, and they can't light their own fags. It's just crazy. So that's it in a nutshell, isn't it?
Okay, I've got a question for you. Why do dogs, and this is almost universal in the UK and Europe and probably in the States as well, why do dogs eat so much herbivore poo? I'm talking rabbit poo, I'm talking horse poo, even mine will, sheep poo. How come they go for that? What's that about, gentlemen?
So for me, that would, well, look, we all think about probiotics. We think it's a probiotic thing. But actually, No, if they've gone through the gut, what I was saying earlier, those herbivores are surviving on great nutrients, so vitamins that those bacteria are spitting out.
Yeah.
There's going to be all of those volatile fatty acids. There's going to be essential fatty acids. There's going to be, some other nutrients within that poo. It's eventually they can't suck out every last bit of goodness from that feces before it pops out the back end. So those dogs, just as I would have thought with the berries, they're massively high in certain anthocyanins, the real sort of, they're medicines, truly are medicines within some of those berries. We're not talking farmed fat blueberries here. We're talking, when they're foraging, it's bilberries on the moorland, or it's blackberries that are off a bush, not from a farm. Take them into the raspberry farm, and I'm sure they would go down those roads. But realistically, we're talking about foraging from hedgerows here. Even if they're eating some of the herbage that's on that side, I would say it's more medicinal than truly a function of being able to get nutrients out of that. Whereas when we're talking about that poo and poo eating, I would actually say, sure, I guess there's a little bit of bacterial sharing and probiotics, but actually it's the end product that those bacteria are producing that's probably going to be really attractive to dogs.
Postbiotics, isn't that what they call them now?
Yeah.
That's the cool word. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. That's where the nutrients are coming from. That's what I would have thought as well. Everything Brent said there, I would have thought. I never really thought about the biome bit of it. I just assumed that different poos have different kind of qualities, like different flavored pez, and it's just like lovely. They're coprophagic animals. They're happy to eat poo, and so unfortunately for us, so if they need something and if they see it's in there, half digested plant matter for a bit of roughage or some type of vitamin that they're low on, I think it's very normal for them. There's studies of free roaming dogs in Zimbabwe, and they eat 30% human poo from village dumps. 30% of their diet is human poo, and because they have no protein in their diet, they've no, and so you might as well get a bit of meat that way.
Don't tell the British veterinary profession that. They'll be in uproar about the bacterial risk to all of the people around those dogs.
Yeah. Those, and that the problem with the diet studies is that's where we get our diet studies from. We get them from these areas of the world where there's free roaming dogs and they do culls. That's essentially it. We just don't have free roaming dogs in Ireland or England that we can kind of track. We just don't have that in the Wicklow Mountains. We'd rescue them and we'd put them in a pound, sadly, and they're probably happy enough walking around Wicklow Mountains. Don't put me in here. But when we do look at these diet studies, the diet studies are confusing people, because we know that dogs and cats can be taught in the first 5 months of life what to eat. And so you have these videos of these vegan cats trying to chew on a piece of broccoli. And we know that's pretty much bordering obscene. It's a ridiculous thing, but they do it. And the person can say, see, my cat loves broccoli. And it's not that they love it. You've taught them to eat it. And we've had studies from back in the 60s and 70s from China and Japan showing that you can actually train a dog to eat all vegetarian stuff, all meat and bone stuff, all soy stuff. So I think it's kind of, you can train the dogs to do it, and that's the confusion. So if you're growing up in India and you get a lot of plant leftovers because there's not a lot of spare meat, well, then 50% of your diet is plant matter, porridge and sadza and stuff that the dog clearly didn't cook itself. And then it goes out and tries to top up its failing protein reserves, is what they say. But truly feral dogs are highly carnivorous. We've only got 2 or 3 of those studies. There's one in the US. Highly carnivorous animals. They don't like humans. They don't go near them. And as a result, their diet is very largely meat. So that's the confusion with the diet studies that people need to remember. Humans get in the way. You can't have humans feeding dogs because then it's not a diet study. Yeah.
If we look at Fred Provenza, his book is Nourishment, which is a really opus tome. And if you want to, we've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you want to get a slightly shortened version, it's something like 270,000 words, which for an ebook is pretty big. If you go to the audio book, it's about 140,000 words. So it's still really meaty, as it were, but it's much more condensed. And he reads it himself, and he's like the elf from Christmas or something. He's very, very clever, very, very wise, very, very zen. So he's lovely to listen to. And his major thesis is that there is innate wisdom within the foraging community, and therefore by extension to animals. If you give he does a lot of work on goats and sheep, mainly goats, and he will say that what any given goat selects in the morning will be different from what they select in the afternoon, and that it will reflect what they require at, in the morning, in the afternoon. And the other really wonderful observation of his is that they will learn, goats will learn, for example, that if they need to eat toxic plant B because they require something from it, copper or magnesium or something like that, they have learned that if they eat protective plant A before they eat toxic plant B, it will then protect them from any negative, nauseating, irritating effects from that plant. So I think that the animals have mechanisms, if they're given enough variety, as you're saying, Connor. If you got to get the people out the way, you've got to give them free range, and they will have a nibble on this, have a nibble on a blackberry, eat rabbits and goats and rats and what have you, just kind of fill their bellies. But there will be other elements, other outliers, where they require perhaps some antioxidants in the autumn before they go into winter, and so they go and graze some berries before they go in. I think this is a wonderful. It's kind of obvious, but he has done these studies. He's been working in the field for about 40 years, and he has done minute studies looking at exactly what they eat at any given time. For example, they'll actually be able to take what they eat and then analyze it in the morning, in the afternoon. So I think he's a great guy to look into if you like this stuff, and I think it is very, very important, fundamental nutrition.
It's a great fundamental tome, as you say. I mean, there's so many of the other books. We've had Defending Beef refers back to him as well, and you've got so You Are What You Ate refers back to him in several points. It just, and so it goes on. I think there's so many people that view those texts, and keeping goats, I absolutely, I don't spray the land. I literally have been on an organic project now for the last 4 years on this piece of land, of just basically pulling ragwort, just to try and putting in other things to the sward. There is a bit of bracken. The goats are so interesting, as you say. You cannot keep them. They're so great at getting out of a field to what they want. So there is some bracken in some areas, so they will go and browse on the bracken, which is supposedly a really good way of worming yourself out if you need to, and controlling parasites. But you're absolutely right. They'll be hedgerow eating, one moment. They'll all of a sudden, just as a little herd, find their way down to eat some oak or something like that, and then they'll toddle across and they'll be eating the heads off the ragwort, even if there's any little ones left behind. And you're like pulling your hair out, thinking, of all the plants, why are you going for that? But as you say, they've been eating so much else within the sward. It's taken 4 years to stop it just being cattle grass, as I call it, that green field of nothing else, because they've sprayed it to an inch of its life, and then reseeded it with just grass. But no, it's a really nice mixed sward now, and just seeing them go through, you can sit there on the hillside. That's just cool. Watching them go around and selectively browse for what they want. So it's really good.
So here's another little question, guys, just philosophical. So if in the UK, we'll make this, or maybe in the States, say, if all the humans just disappeared off the face of the earth, what would dogs eat? Okay, they're all let off. Every front door is open and they can go out, and so what would they eat? I'm going to tell you now, if there was a warehouse full of raw canning food, they would go for that. However, they would long-term, and there was a long-term supply, I don't think that would be a major part of what they chose if they had free access to, you know, lots of bunnies and lots of deer and lots of goats and what have you, where would you go with that thought experiment?
I mean, if the Royal Cannon factory was beside the sausage factory, I don't think many dogs would walk in the door of the Royal Cannon factory. I'm pretty sure. Like they have loads of studies done of dogs with taste preference trials. Lots of them done by Mars. They have their answer, and the first taste preference is, okay, you can have a tiny bit of meat or a massive pile of dry food, and they work harder for the tiny bit of meat. They'll do the names, they'll do the commands for the piece of meat. They'll eat gravy flavored tissue over other plant items. Like anything meat flavored drives these animals mad. They work for meat. We all know it's meat. So they definitely go for meat. And then the second thing is they divide into protein, fat, and carbs, and they let these dogs off the lead to feed ad lib. In other words, you can just choose whatever you want, buddy. And if you put down meat with plant items, they always go for the meat first. Kibble, never first. I mean, you can try find me a study where they ate the kibble first. Even dry-fed dogs would take the meat first. Even the vegetarian-fed dogs took the meat first on the TV that time. That poor girl.
Yes, I know.
Oh my God, I felt so sorry for her. But that was a wake-up call. But yeah, but they also, the protein, fat, and carb thing is that they will pig out. Even when the dogs are fed high carbohydrate diets, they go straight for the fat first of all, because fat is a high-quality commodity. It's high impact, a lot of energy, and so in the wild, that's what you want, because you're always short on it, so you want to chop up in the fat. And then over time, when they realize there's more and more fat coming, they think, I better slow down here, I'm going to have a heart attack, and they move more and more towards protein. But never do the dogs get above 7% carbohydrates in their diet. That study was done by Mars, and they said, this is the animal telling you, I prefer meat and I don't eat carbs when I'm giving, even when these dogs are reared on dry food. So I think if you let dogs off the lead out in the wild, they would go looking for the easiest sources of meat and whatnot. The problem that we have is that they haven't been trained to hunt. So dogs like Dudley haven't a hope. I mean, he'd be the cheeseburger running around the field. So, like, you know, they don't have. You have to have exposure to prey. We got dogs getting into fields here and terrorizing lambs because they don't know how to hunt in a coordinated way. They're barking and yipping and scaring the lambs. They're not hunting in a smart, kind of clever way. So they just tire them out. So it's just hours and hours until they're exhausted, and then they start to eat them. It's a terrible, terrible end. So they don't have the wits to bring down bigger animals. So I think that'd be tricky for them. I wonder what would happen.
Yeah, that's another philosophical issue, isn't it? As to, yeah, we've corrupted the species so much by our presence that, you know, we're preventing them often displaying natural behavior. Yeah. And actually, one of the 5 freedoms that we were taught at university, and actually has extended, I think, to 6 or 7 now, but, you know, from a point of the 5 freedoms was the ability to display natural behavior. You know, if we're going to, you know, have an animal in captivity, that was one of the essential freedoms that we should be giving them. Now, often we looked at farm animals being given those luxuries, but there should be no reason why that shouldn't extend to our pets. And I have always held that actually forcing them to eat kibble food is far from letting them display natural behavior.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
so I think, you know, there's certainly things that we should be doing to allow them, you know, and actually I think through training a little bit of whole prey into that diet. We've talked about the fiber benefits of doing that, you know, giving the skin and fur and also the sinews alongside the meat has a big part to play. But it actually does. I mean, for Artie, she now will hunt rats. She's followed our cat as to how to hunt mice and rats. She now actively does it out on the farmland. You know, we've kept the grass pretty long so that the barn owls have got lots more mice and, you know, critters to eat on, and so we've got great barn owls swooping over us all the time, which is brilliant.
Love that.
But, you know, she literally, you see Artie diving into the clumps of grass and pulling out, you know, things to eat of her own volition now. You know, that's allowing her natural behavior.
Yeah,
and I think that's born from her to some degree being, you know, understanding this is food.
Yeah,
she'll bring back rabbits and things like that as well, but, you know, ultimately she'll get a good mix. So I think, you know, it's really interesting going back to nature. I think if they've got time and a bit of training, then yes, they would be able to do it. Even Dudley, bless him.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe animals that can't. walk.
maybe he'd be that part of the pack that's just sort of like shouting,
Just
you know,
waiting.
if there's people
Yeah.
coming up, and then
he's
when they
pushy.
finish, he'll just come in and eat.
Yeah, he's no walkover. If there's food around, he'll make a big scene about stealing it and then showing everybody he's got it. So like he'll do things like that, but he's just not able to do anything really. You know, he's still managing the stairs. Do you know what I saw talking about barn owls? I love barn owls. Some guys set up a load of microphones inside a room, and they flew a pigeon from A to B, and you listen to his wings, boom, 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 big noisy. Dumb pigeon. No offense to pigeons, I'm sure they're very smart. They are actually very smart. I've seen them in many trials. And then they flew some sort of falcon, say, and you know, but you can hear, and so you can hear all the wings, and then the barn owl flies, and you can't hear a thing. He's flapping his wings, and the mics don't pick it up. And the two guys around there going, I cannot believe I can't hear anything. These are sensitive mics. You just get one tiny little spike at one stage. So he's just flapped his way across. Nobody hears anything when he flaps his wings. Isn't that amazing? What an amazing animal. Love that.
Oh, but in twilight, there's nothing like sitting out with the goats around you, dogs just sitting there, looking over the valley and just seeing the barn owls doing their thing across the field.
Love that.
Wonderful.
Are these fields, is it the field straight across from your house?
Yeah.
They're the fields. Yeah. How many fields? What sort of space have you got?
It's about 5 acres.
Cool.
6 with the field opposite us. Yeah.
So you can just get a chair and just sit in your field, and you can do whatever you want because it's your field. Oh, I'd love that.
Yeah, I feel really sad now. Like that's my.
Yeah, no, that's what everybody wants, though, Brent. Do you know, that's what everybody wants. Yeah, I'd love that.
Guys, almost 1945. I'm going to drag you over to Patreon because I've got a philosophical talking about expressing behavior. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that question before I disappear and continue to unpack the car.
I love that. And finish the wine.
Put everything away. Yeah.
Don't forget, guys, we're on Patreon, and I'm going to give everyone on Patreon a free code for my course on Carnivore or Omnivore, and the entire first section of my book comes with that course. It's all for free for people on Patreon as a little thank you. So do pop over there and catch us. Next week, it's Q&A. So get your questions ready and pop them up on Patreon there, and I'll be posting on my page, and it can be posted on his. I'm sure.
And the post will be slightly early this time because we're going to be having to do a little bit of a pre-record because it's bank holiday over in the UK.
Yeah.
So there's a few things going on, and we just want to still give you an episode. So we're going to do it as a pre-record. So please get your questions in early. Look out for that. And it's been great to see all of you guys, talking and interacting tonight.
I don't think they were listening to us tonight. I think they were just talking to themselves.
No, they're just chatting while we.
There's just so much chat going on. It's like, hello. We might as well just sign off.
And then, so Nick, this weekend you're going to be
at Edition Dog Live. Just a big shout out, to the guys there. And if anybody's going, I think.
Doris Lowe was going.
Doris Lowe was mentioning it.
Karen Reed's going.
Sasha.
I've seen. So Sasha's going too. I think Moddy's going. So there'll be a few of us there. I'll be there on the RFVS stand. So do come and give us a hello and see how things are going. So it'll be great down at Stoneleigh.
Enjoy that, lads.
It's really not that expensive, is it? I think it's about £10 to get in.
It's great, and it's really good. The vibe is fantastic in there. It was last year. It's great.
Although I think there's 1 or 2 boring speakers on this year. I think he
didn't get
generally is on every year.
Twice.
I think,
Nick's on twice. Oh my god! No wonder it's only 10 minutes.
All right. Sorry.
That'd be rough.
We can do lots of questions.
Yeah,
you are allowed to take your dogs in. So
it's very relaxed. It's very good.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll see you on Patreon.
Amazing. See you over on Patreon. Take care.